let's do the partnership, please. Handing over to Bonnie.
Okay. Hopefully you can all hear me. My internet is not great, but Rebecca, thank you so much for that beautiful work. I would say wow and awesome. So both. Let's see. I'm going to share my desktop. All right, can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. So we're going to talk a bit about partnerships. As you've heard from all of us today, from Jessica, myself, from Marcus a lot, and from Manny, partnerships is a common thread and a key component to the successful advocacy of CAP and POPE2. This ranges from partnerships with the government to the media, and even internally, I think, at your own national society with your internal departments. Let's see. Sometimes they may already exist to be strengthened. Sometimes they need to be identified and built. And this is what I hope to touch on today, is how to first leverage your unique role in advocating on behalf of the Red Cross and Red Crescent for CAP, and how to identify the right partners for you in this process, and some key action steps moving forward, some key guiding questions. And then I'll talk a bit about where we are on a global level on building partnerships with the IFRC and GDPC on behalf of CAP and your national alerting. And we'll even hear a bit from two of our partners. Gavin White at REAP is joining us. And we also have a nice presentation from Google. So first, I think it's important to go back to what we discussed a bit before on Menti, and that's understanding the unique role you have as national societies, as the Red Cross and Red Crescent. Sorry, my internet. Okay. Hopefully you can still hear me. As the Red Cross and Red Crescent, to advocate on the use of CAP. And what we saw in the unique role question on Menti is that a lot of you mentioned that it was cooperation. It's cooperation with alerting authorities, also connecting with on a community level with those at risk and with the media, and also talked a lot about what we could bring to the table as a reliable source of information. And that came into our presentation about actionable messaging and how we can bring that to the table. So when I think about our role, I'd like to think about it on two levels. One is partnerships with the government, and secondly, working with the community, partnerships with the media, and really connecting on the community level. So first, addressing the government, we know that alerting is the responsibility of the alerting authorities and not of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. However, that does not mean we don't have a really potentially strong role to play here. And that, of course, is, as we've heard a million times at this point, it's because of our auxiliary role to public authorities. We hear that word, I think, a lot, auxiliary. I use it all the time. I hear others do. And I was in an exercise recently where we talked about auxiliary, and it means actually different things to a lot of different people. And I'd be really curious to hear what it means to you. So in the exercise I did before, everyone wrote in the chat maybe a word or two about what auxiliary means to you. And I'd be really curious, and we can talk a little bit about that too. But I'd like to share what I've heard. And I've heard that it means support. It means support. I've heard complement. I think I've heard supplement as well. But a word I heard recently that I think really resonates for me, for us, and for this situation is opportunity. And what it is, what auxiliary can mean is it's an opportunity to leverage in order to support what we advocate for. And in this situation, it's an opportunity to gain support for advocating for CAP. And I'm going to quickly recognize that it's much easier said than done. Alerting infrastructure, as we've discussed, is really complex. And navigating that external environment is not easy. And that is why your expertise with the community and with disaster preparedness, early warning, early action, it comes into play. And you have the opportunity to link that community level knowledge and connections and community early warning systems with national ones, which is an identified real gap. And you can help support alerts getting to people in an inclusive way and being understood and acted upon. So our role, just to reiterate a bit here, is that it's really national level advocacy with alerting authorities. It's bringing our community level knowledge. And that means that we can adapt key messages, the POPE key messages, the what now safety tips, bring that as an opening piece in advocacy for CAP at the national level. And also on a community level and on a national level, we can connect with the media. This is a really important piece that Marcus Manny and Nate really touched upon, and that is that we can make those connections with media, and we can do to make sure it's disseminated, that these alerts are being disseminated. So a few tools here, let's see, hope that's still showing, and this is going to be really reiterating what Marcus shared, but a first tool is stakeholder mapping, and that is identifying your targets. Well, by targets, I mean partners, identifying your partners at the governmental level. Who is sending alerts? For which hazards are they sending alerts? Who can I connect with? And it's also about how to advocate. You identify the gaps, and often one is that maybe they're not using CAP, but also maybe they are using CAP or even aren't. Are they using actionable key messaging? And a unique part of CAP, when you advocate for it, is that it can incorporate, as we mentioned before, your PAPE, your what now key messaging from national societies, and really easily. So a great first step while you're identifying your stakeholders is also adapting those PAPE key messages and approaching the government, the alerting authorities with these key messages. You come in hand with something concrete, you're drawing on your expertise and your community's trust in that expertise, and it can help alerting authorities understand the value of CAP and how you as a national society is really there to support and can be a trusted source. And this is also where partnership building on the community level is critical. This involves identifying the right media to target. And this could come from a community-based survey. We've had national societies do a survey to understand the media that the public goes to and trusts, especially ensuring that you cover those, as we mentioned, that often have challenges in accessing information. And then how can we use CAP to connect with the media that can reach these really vulnerable groups. It also involves understanding, similar to what you would be doing with alerting authorities. It also involves understanding how to leverage the PAPE key messages to the media, with the talking point being that, well, with CAP, these alerts are centralized, they're easy to pick up from the hub, and they also have the Red Cross and Crescent messaging that they can broadcast across all channels, and how this would be really a great entry point for the media to start using CAP alerts is that people trust the information that is coming from the Red Cross and Red Crescent with the actionable key messaging. So they would trust the alerts that they're using, these CAP alerts. And it feeds back as trust in the communication channel as well, because people will keep coming back to them for alerting information. And of course, then we see that the media are putting out consistent messaging when they're using CAP. And then a community member can get a message, as we mentioned, from the radio, from the TV, and they're getting the same information in the same format. So it's really understanding your role as auxiliary is key. It's secondly, identifying your targets and the alerting authorities. It's also contextualizing your key messages, using it as a tool to approach the alerting authorities and build those partnerships. Fourth, it's understanding and identifying media outlets and communication channels across national and local levels that could share the alerts. And it's also building those partnerships to advocate for their usage and dissemination of the official CAP alerts. And so your key advocacy pieces is that you're going to have PAPE included. It's going to be consistent. It's going to be trusting. It's going to be your expertise. And you have those community level media connections. You're connecting the community with the national level. And that's where the Red Cross, Red Crescent can really come in. And it's using these advocacy pieces, understanding your value add, so you can go to those partners that you identified in stakeholder mapping, the alerting authorities, the media channels, and you can make sure that they understand CAP, they understand how to disseminate alerts, access alerts, and make sure the community are receiving them and they know what to do and they know what hazard might be in the way. And I also want to say that IFRC and GDPC are working to build partnerships as well on behalf of CAP, both internationally and supporting you nationally. And I think, as mentioned earlier by Nate, we have partnership with WMO and ITU where we're working to jointly provide technical resources and support in the advocacy and implementation process. And because we all understand the true value of CAP, hopefully you do as well, which is why we're here today. And secondly, I'd like to introduce now one of our partners, and that is our friend and partner, Gavin White. He's a strategic partnerships lead at REAP, You probably have heard of the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership Initiative, which is an IFRC hosted initiative. He has vast experience with the movement and in the early warning, early action space. And he has joined us to share some tips on how to form partnerships and to highlight REAP's work in building partnerships in this space. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Gavin.
Okay, well, good morning, good very early morning, and good very late evening, and everyone in between. Let's see if I can actually succeed in sharing my screen. So as Bonnie just explained, I am working with the Risk Informed Early Action Partnership, REAP, and I'll try to briefly cover what we do, how that fits with the broader discussions around early warning and early action, and how that is relevant for the Red Cross, for the national societies, and for your work. So let me just go over to the next slide, and feel free to jot down any questions. We can also take questions as well. So the background, it's a very new initiative. It was born in September 2019 at the UN Climate Action Summit. Its goal is to make 1 billion people safer from disaster by 2025. So not a small task. We have about 4 years to go in this initiative. So it's a very short time-bound initiative. And it's really meant to bring together different actors from the climate sector, humanitarian sector, development sector, and as Bonnie just mentioned, the meteorological communities are very important as well. So it's bringing organizations that maybe traditionally are not used to working together and trying to help them see what they have in common. And Red Cross National Societies actually do fit across several of those sectors. So they're a really important, they play an important role at national level. So it'll be important for you to kind of, as we go through this, look at the lens of your national society. What does that mean for your context? So this is the original membership of REAP. A few organizations have joined. You'll see that there are really 2 or 3 very different types of members. We have national governments. So it was launched by about a dozen governments, a mix of donor governments, Finland, France, Germany, Japan, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Norway, UK, and a lot of countries that are very exposed to climate risks. So you have Jamaica, you have Belize, Bangladesh, and a few others that have joined since. Really, this is our core. It's about these organizations that are very exposed to climate risks and are really interested in this initiative. Then we try to link those governments to civil society organizations. So you can see a whole range right there, but also UN agencies. So you'll see FAO, OCHA, UNDR for disaster risk reduction, the World Food Program. Bonnie also just mentioned the World Meteorological Organization, very important for the forecasts, UNDP. And you'll see in the middle of all that, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, which means all 192 or 93 national societies are actively involved in this process because they're key in linking the knowledge from the ground, the academic side, with the decision-making side in climate action. So what do we focus on? Focus on specifically on early action. It's a very targeted initiative. It's really about looking ahead of severe weather events, looking at when we do have forecasts, what are the mechanisms that we can release finance or human resources or just information so we can act ahead of a disaster. So it's not something new. It's been around for a while with humanitarian sector in particular. But it's now about recognizing that we need to scale it up, looking at how we can go from a more reactive model of going to where there's a risk, maybe trying to prevent some of the risks long-term, and looking at it from the analysis of data, knowing that actually, if sea level is going to rise, maybe we'll need to look at our sea level risks in coastal areas from a very different lens. And then based on annual predictions, maybe we know that we need to take specific actions ahead of time. At this stage, we do recognize that the forecasting capacity has significantly increased, but that's not translated itself into early action. So we still need to do a lot, and we recognize it's not limited to the humanitarian sector. It's about connecting to other sectors as well. The guiding thread for us is that there's a lot of evidence that early action saves lives and livelihoods. So this is important, I guess, for your own advocacy as a Red Cross, Red Crescent Society. It's about making sure that you can make the case that this is important because there is a humanitarian imperative. It also has a broader development imperative. It protects development gains. So if you build a road, if you build a school and you factor in these longer term trends, you can factor in that there's actually some measure that can be taken to strengthen the infrastructure, but also making sure that when there's a shorter term threat, you can take measures now and don't have to wait down the line. so we can avoid schools being destroyed or communities getting severely damaged through disasters. So it's cost effective, much cheaper tax now, and it enables more faster, cheaper, and more dignified humanitarian assistance. So you can see a strong tie to the humanitarian sector and to the development sector, but again, from a climate lens. So it's based around 4 targets, right? I won't go into too much detail. Maybe I'll spend a little more time instead on concrete examples. What does that mean for Red Cross? But the targets are, we want by 2025 to have 50 countries who have integrated their different laws, policies, and plans. So looking at the legislative framework, so we can connect the disaster risk management laws and policies with the climate adaptation ones. For COP, for instance, we're looking a lot at the national adaptation plans, national determined contributions. How are these aligned with longer term development planning? How are they aligned with shorter term humanitarian funding priorities? So that's a target of 50 countries that will be involved in that process. And then there's 2 targets around people. So number 2 and number 4. So target 2 is looking at the financing mechanisms. We want to be able to make sure that we can reach 1 billion people. When we talk about we and REAP, it's not the we secretariat. It's a very small team. The REAP we is this group of countries and organizations. It's this group that includes the UN agencies. It includes the IFRC and the 192 members. So it's really about making sure that collectively the actions are taken so that we can release finances, we can find new delivery mechanisms. So when there is a risk, communities can take action a few days, weeks, or preferably months ahead of time, so we can make sure that the hazard does not become a disaster. Target 3 is about investments. So we're working a lot with UNDP, Green Climate Fund, and others on making sure that these investments are actually able to withstand the current changes that we're already seeing in the climate. So early action on the infrastructure side, and making sure it really reflects the needs from the communities. So the idea is that these last mile communities, the communities that usually are reached last, actually become the first mile communities for us. They're actually the first people that are contacted by UNDP initiatives, joining with the governments, by Green Climate Fund funding, that these funds actually are factoring in what those sometimes isolated communities really need to be able to sustain and adapt to a changing world. And the last one is about the early warning system. So very much tied again to the common alerting protocols. We want to make sure that there's longer term risk management systems that reflect that. It's the whole chain. So don't look at the targets as different pieces. They're part of a process of achieving early action. So we have to look at how we collect data. That's why we work a lot with WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, as they try to expand the data collection. We work with the governments so that the policies are aligned. We work with the alerting authorities so that when the information comes out, it's readily accessible. It can be shared in a common standard, a common alerting protocol. That common alerting protocol can then lead to actionable early warning. So the public awareness, public education, the PAPE of the Red Cross and other methodologies. And all that finally will allow us to actually take action that is very specific and very targeted. So you can look at specific tools. The IFRC has the forecast-based action FBA by the GIREF as one of many tools, but this is a humanitarian tool. The SURF from the UN system similarly is a humanitarian tool. What we're trying to do is make sure that we can expand that. So for example, there's an experience in India with a social protection mechanism for farmers. And the idea is that the social protection mechanism is now being adjusted or modified so that they can release funds to farmers when there's a drought forecast. So farmers can adapt their crops ahead of time so that they won't suffer from the drought. So the social protection mechanism, which is already in place, is being tweaked to adjust to new circumstances in a changing climate. So how we do it in REAP, so again, the REAP collective, is first of all, the political momentum. So we work across governments, donors, international organizations, civil society organizations, private sector. And a lot is about, first of all, making sure that everyone's on the same page. REAP is often used as a mechanism to promote things that are already important for specific donors or specific governments. We work a lot with the Pacific Islands, Caribbean islands, very much affected by increase in sea level rise. And they see through REAP an opportunity to advocate on the issue of early action. We need to take action now for the risks that they're being exposed to when they speak to donors. And donors similarly need to advocate internally on the importance of this issue. So we try to provide them with information from the field as to what is happening. So we use events, we have high-level champions, we have different communications, and altogether what we try to do is just to create the second point here, an enabling environment. So about reporting and accountability mechanisms, very specific targets, so we can measure progress, measure momentum. We're working on donor guidelines, we're working on a common language. So when people talk about early action in the development sector, in the climate sector, in the humanitarian sector, and the academic, the government authorities, they're actually using the terms to mean the same thing. That's not currently the case. So a lot is about just getting people on the same page. And the last one, marketplace function. I think this is probably the most relevant as a first entry point for national societies, just bringing people together, putting in the same room the experiences from the Red Cross in Nepal with some funding maybe of UNDP, some policy work by UNDR and the government of Nepal. How are we working together on these issues? And as I promised, I'd try to give some more concrete examples. Finland, which is one of the founding members of REAP, has been using this marketplace to promote some of its good work. So they've been working a lot with the Met offices. And in Nepal, they worked with the Finnish Met office to get stronger data for the Nepalese meteorological organization. And the Finnish Red Cross reached out to the Nepalese Red Cross, and together they're working on improving the use of data from the Met office in Nepal and how that is being shared across on the ground. So that's one concrete example of how these partnerships, bringing people together to discuss a specific context, can lead to concrete action. A second example is the work in the Climate Center of the Red Cross and the IFRC, and they got some funding through a consortium from the Green Climate Fund that they were doing some work in the Pacific. And one of the REAP members, Liechtenstein, a very small country, but wants to put some money towards this, and partnered with the Climate Center and expanded the existing program so they could work in 5 additional countries, Cook Islands, Niue, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu. So they expand an existing program to work in different areas because the program is already designed and allow them just through this marketplace to find new partners to expand their work. So this is just a couple examples how we use the opportunity of having very different partners to work together on addressing what they consider as a shared priority. For national studies, what are some of the opportunities here? Maybe the first important clarification is REAP is not a funding mechanism. We don't provide funds. We really try to bring people together, some of which have money. Some of them are donor governments. Some of them are international multilateral donors, international development banks, with the World Bank. So the idea is, how do we work together and connect the dots? So for a national society, we work very closely with the Anticipation Hub, which is a great entry point to get a lot of information on this. And we're working together to make sure that there's a common understanding around these early and anticipatory approaches and how we have seen it being taken to scale. So together, we try to provide a platform to showcase good practices. We try to provide access to partners outside of the usual suspects. So you can get to speak to maybe the Met Office in different countries, different UN agencies, maybe they haven't thought of before. FAO, WFP have done a lot of work on these topics. UNDP I mentioned as well, OCHA as well. So there's different UN partners, but there's also research institutions that work on these topics and help provide the data. So it's about connecting the gaps through our marketplace, connecting the partners. And as you can see on the last point about influencing policy, how can we make sure that there is that awareness at global level? I'll just finish on some of our concrete participation and events on some of these events. So we had the launch of the REAP Framework for Action in the Climate Adaptation Summit at the beginning of this year. We had the second meeting of the REAP High-Level Governing Board just a few months ago. There was a closed-door pledging conference where we get donors to commit funds to this agenda and make sure that reaches the organizations on the ground that really are able to take this to scale. We just finalized our monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy. So second quarter, that was finished, I think, over in August. And our big priority right now for the next 5 weeks is the UNFCCC COP26 conference, where you can see Actually, on the screen, there are some of our prior speakers, but many of them will also join us on some of the REAP panels in COP26 to really push for the early action agenda. There will be several participants from the IFRC. I know that Jagan Chapagan has already contributed a video. There are the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross will be on one of our REAP panels, so they should be able to talk about the experience on the ground. So we have multiple speakers that will be able to talk about and showcase the experience of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. I'll leave it at that, so we can maybe, if there's any questions or clarifications, I can help to address those as well.
Excellent, Gavin. Thank you. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. Really, I guess from my side, Gavin, interesting kind of the sort of the advice for national societies, the importance of advocacy and the partnership piece at a national and local level, which, you know, is something we've been touched on quite a bit over the course of the day, and it's nice to see that coming up again.
Maybe I'll just add to that, Nate. I think it's really important to recognize that the Red Cross plays a critical role in many countries because it has that ability. A bit like REAP does at the global level, the Red Cross can play a similar convener role at national level. So often for us, it is very important to have these national partners that don't represent a political agenda or represent a specific focus, but can bring different partners together. So I'd really encourage all national societies that have interest to really take this agenda on. It's a way to position the national society as a key player on the climate agenda, and we need many of those.
Excellent. Thank you, Gavin. So we're going to jump to the next presentation, and after that, we'll come back and have a bit more time for question and answer with Gavin. So the next presentation, we had hoped to have Google here in person, but at the very last minute, they were not able to make it. But what they did do is they put together just a short 10-minute presentation for us to talk about CAP, to talk about why CAP is important to Google, and what that can mean for national societies. So I'll jump to that in just one sec. But just to highlight, I mentioned it at the beginning, Google is a key partner for the IFRC. They're supporting all the CAP work that we're doing, both at a global and a national level. And they supported in the past the development of the What Now service. So this was taking the public awareness and public education messages and helping us to develop a platform that would enable us to offer those to the wider world. So, you know, again, we mentioned when the CAP alerts go out, those can be paired with these locally contextualized Red Cross and Red Crescent messages. So this is something that Google has been supporting for the past 4 or 5 years. And now they've renewed that support, and they want us to really focus on CAP, which fits well with you know, our mandate, our auxiliary status, and our ambitions in early warning and early action. So let me, with that, see if I can get the presentation to work. And we can hear from our colleagues at Google. Is that working, and is that big enough?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ruha Devanesan, and I manage partnerships for Google's crisis response team. I'm here to give you a short overview of our alerts, but you can also learn much more at crisisresponse.google.com. So you might be asking yourself, why is Google investing in disaster or crisis alerts? Aren't they a search company? Yes, we are. But we also recognize that in times of crisis, people often turn to the platforms that they know and they trust to find out what's going on. You can see here, for example, that over the years, when a natural or a man-made disaster has happened, we've seen massive spikes in queries across search, maps, and YouTube from users trying to understand what's going on. So this, in combination with several years of field research and user studies, led us to decide we really can and should do something in crisis alerting. One of the things that we learned through these user studies, for example, is that in a time of crisis, people are really looking for 4 main things. They want to know what's happening. They want to know where it's happening. They want to know how bad this is, and then they want to understand what actions they should be taking. And so when we built our crisis alerts, this is what we focused on, answering these 4 questions as simply and clearly as we can with authoritative information from experts on the ground. You'll see here that, and this is just data from the past 4 years, but you can see the scale of people we've reached with our crisis alerts. Almost 4 billion people across the world have seen alerts from Google across more than 30 countries. We built these alerts in partnership with government authorities and nonprofit experts like yourself, because while Google has the platform and we have the eyeballs, we know that we're not experts in the space of telling people about natural disasters or hazards, and also about what to do when these things occur. So one of the main ways in which we publish alerts to users is through a product we call public alerts. This is the first kind of alert we built at Google. And these alerts leverage Common Alerting Protocol, which you're likely to either have heard about already at today's conference or will hear about soon from your colleagues at IFRC. We pull in CAP feeds, Common Alerting Protocol feeds, from government partners across the world and across many hazard types. So these are our most far-reaching alerts. They're also often the quickest way to tell search users that a hazard is approaching and what to do. So this is by far the most impactful kind of alert that we publish or we push out to users. I know that it can be challenging to adopt a new format of alerting to the public, especially when you're already using different tools and platforms to do your current alerting. One thing that I'll just say here is, as a platform that works across the world, it's very important to us as Google Search to work with governments in a consistent standard format of data ingestion. This is why we as Google truly value CAP as a standard. It allows us and other global platforms to ingest government data across the world in a uniform and a consistent format, which then allows us to scale and partner more effectively across all these hazards. Now, I talked to you about Common Alerting Protocol. You might have seen what CAP alerts look like in other platforms. This is what CAP alerts look like when they show up on Google Search and on Google Maps. You'll see at the top that we have the name of the event in red. We then have the location, the time of posting from the publisher, and the source below that. Below those things, we have a description of the event. Again, this comes to us directly from the government publisher. And below that, we have an attribution link. So in this case, this is an alert from Environment Canada, which is one of our longest standing public alerts partners. And you can see that we have an attribution to them that links back to their own website. And then finally, at the bottom, we have a feedback link. So we have the capacity to take in input from search users and Maps users that tell us, hey, this is what we liked about this alert, this is what we didn't like, and it helps us iterate on how we build these alerts for users in the future. Where we do not yet have public alerts partnerships, so that means where we don't have a CAP feed from a government for a particular hazard, we have a different product that we call SOS alerts. SOS alerts are a kind of alert that is created by our own crisis response team. So the goal here is still to raise the most authoritative and helpful information from emergency agencies in the affected area, but instead of setting up an automated feed ahead of time, we have to respond after the crisis has happened, and then we go out and we source that information on the web and combine it with top news stories, safety tips from IFRC, and then launch the alert to the public in that affected area. You can see here that our SOS alerts appear on search, on maps, on Google Maps, And we also have a new tool on Google Maps that help users navigate, that basically navigational warnings. So if someone's about to set out on a journey and we know that there is a hazard that is going to affect their pathway, we pop up a card that tells them, hey, something's happening on your route, you might want to reconsider. You'll notice I mentioned safety tips from IFRC. So in 2019, Google actually partnered with IFRC to bring What Now safety tips into our SOS alerts. This allows us to show authoritative and locally relevant safety tips from Red Cross and Red Crescent societies across the world. We're really eager to bring more of these safety tips into Google search for more countries. So the more of you that sign on to What Now and provide your localized guidance, the better it is for search users and the better it is ultimately for users in your locale. Finally, I'm personally really excited to see the partnership between Google and IFRC to bring more governments onto the CAP standard. As I mentioned earlier, there are parts of the world where we don't yet cover with public alerts because we don't yet have CAP feeds available for us to ingest. So it is our hope that this endeavor by IFRC and all of you as their partners will help millions more users receive life-saving alerts in the places that they need them the most, and with safety tips from What Now in the coming years. Now, before I leave you, I thought I could share a few things that we on Search have learned from doing crisis alerting on digital platforms that hopefully will help you as you think about bringing your alerts and your recommendations to digital audiences in the near future. The first thing I'll say is that we have found visuals really, really matter. It's very hard for a person who's in the midst of a crisis to read through and understand a wall of text. Showing them a visual of where the hazard is, especially where it is in relation to where they are, showing them how severe it is near them, and showing them when the hazard might reach them helps them understand in a second what it might otherwise take a minute or more for them to read and understand. This is why over the past couple of years, we on the Google search team have partnered heavily internally with the research team and the Maps team to make our SOS alerts much more visually rich. So you can see here our tropical storm or hurricane or typhoon cones were the first visually rich SOS alert that we published. We then worked on doing earthquake shake maps. So these are launched and live globally, and we do this in partnership with the US Geological Survey. And we have some really great new developments on flood forecasting and wildfire boundary maps. Again, building out more visual representation so that we can show users on the ground where is the hazard in relation to them, and how severe is that hazard in relation to where they are. The second thing that I'll say is that actionable messaging is key. It's not only important to tell users what hazard is happening, you also need to tell them what they should be doing about it. This is, again, going back to What Now safety tips. This is why What Now and safety recommendations in general are so key and critical for users. They need to understand not just what is this hazard and how severe is it, but what should I, as a person in the midst of this hazard, be doing in the next few seconds, in the next few minutes, in the next few hours. And these guidances we know can change and can be very locally different. So this is why working with an organization like IFRC for Google is really important, because they have networks of experts across the world that can really bring that locally actionable guidance to life on our platform. The final takeaway slide I'll leave you with is keep it simple. I'll remind you that the top 4 things that users want to know is what is happening, where is it happening, how bad is it, and what should they do about it. The more you can focus on these 4 things in a clear, direct, and actionable way, in a short and simple way, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to tell people what they need to know to take protective action in the next few seconds after they read this alert from you, that could really help them save their own life, but also the lives of their loved ones and friends. So I wish you luck with the rest of the sessions today, and we hope to see you on IFRC's Alert Hub soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Ned, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, I was just trying to get out of the sharing here.
Cool. What a cool takeaway we do have. I don't know the English word is succinct, precise. I wish I could get the right English word to describe the presentation from Google. What do you think, Ned?
Should we do a quick poll maybe just to kind of take a temperature check of the?
I would like to call it an examination. You know, after all this information that we received, I think people should do a brain teaser. But anyway, it's not an examination, it's a quick poll and it is easy. All right, I'm launching it in 1, 2, 3, go. Do you see it? I think you should.
Yeah.
Okay, please tell us what do you think, and in case you have any questions about the presentation with Google, from Google, please put it in the chat. Would like to get it. I see the countdown is pretty fast, and don't be closed out. Please make your choice count. Select what applies to you most. 45% of the participants have answered so far. 50, we've hit 52, 54%. Thank you very much. Okay, there is a question there from Rebecca. Could you describe the hierarchy or nesting structure of CAP, PAPE, RIP? I think one of them is out, is an odd man out in a way. Okay, would you like to take on that question, Ned, as people make their choices using the poll?
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to. So if you remember back to the presentation Jessica put up, on the one side of the presentation were all the hazards and the CAP going out with those hazards. So the emergency alert is issued by the government using the CAP standard for a particular hazard. Right before that's issued, there is an opportunity to include messages within that alert. So the hazard alert goes out saying there's a hurricane coming. If the messages have been contextualized and agreed to with government, so again, as Bonnie mentioned, the Red Cross and government need to sit down together and say, you know, when there's a hurricane coming, what do we say? And we've got the PAPE, the standard global guidance to do that, but there may be adaptations that need to be done at a national level. And then those go out together. There's in the center of that diagram, there's an alert hub, or there's a way of kind of channeling that information. So Marcus mentioned an application that they were using, but essentially that information is captured, and then media agencies like Google can pick that information up and disseminate it. So REAP is really kind of an overall partnership to promote early action, whereas CAP and PAPE are tools that work towards that overall goal.
Thank you very much. And I see Gavin has his hand up. Please, Gavin, come through.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think Nate's definition is very good. I would just exactly clarify the last point. REAP is not a tool, it's a mechanism to bring people together. But the area that we focus on, which is early action, comes towards the end of that sequence. So once you've had that series of alerts, the messaging has been agreed upon, it's been shared, it's been going out to the communities they needed the most, then there are multiple organizations, including the Red Cross, that work on the actual actions that can be taken based on the forecast. So towards the end of that process is where the early action comes in.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And Net, if you may come back, show face. Look, did you see, or are you able to see the results of the first question?
I am not. Maybe you could, is it possible to put them up or?
Okay, I think it is up.
I've got
on,
my colleagues put them. Excellent.
my-
So connecting community level to national level for early warning. So that is very interesting. This is one we haven't touched on a lot today, but it is a gap that we recognize. It's one we're hoping to go into a little bit more depth during the working sessions. But I don't know, I want to just see if any of my colleagues online, and Elliot too, if you have comments, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Any general thoughts on connecting community level early warning systems to national level? Would anybody like to come in on that?
Jessica, Bonnie. Nazreen. Okay.
And maybe
Looks
just
like Elliot might want to chime in.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah,
Jessica?
great.
Do you want me to go first? Okay. So I think it is really important for everybody to realize the vast majority of emergencies are not national level, unless you happen to have a very small country that's smaller than many cities, and there are some, but for the most part, emergency alerting occurs at communities, and these are neighborhoods. These are possibly city level. And again, really, even then, only if it's a small city. So we already have lots and lots of alerting that's going on at all times. These are not of interest internationally. I mean, in the aggregate, one wants to know that, oh, things are getting worse as a trend over time. But the vast majority of alerting is very, very local. We typically discover when we talk to communities, police, fire, that they are already using CAP and nobody else even knows it. So you may well find that the community level alerting is already well aligned, and they are probably the people who have the strongest connection to the Red Cross volunteers. I mean, they work right with the police and the fire, and they pass out donuts, but lots of other things in an emergency. So that's a really, really important base. It's just that from those of us who work internationally, we're a long distance away from those. And there are many, many of those. We have thousands, I think it's about 4,000 counties in the United States, and we just can't reach all of those. So what we're trying to do is put out a framework and then work it top down from us international organizations, and we are a community of nations, so we are focusing on the national level. But the vast majority of alerting is right there at the community level, and I hope many of you in the national societies recognize that, and you probably have hundreds of thousands of volunteers spread over all of those very, very local communities. I just wanted to make that distinction that the scales here, we kind of have a very local, that's the most important base. It's just us international people aren't well connected to that. We have the international, and our connection happens to be national. So we're connecting nations.
Excellent, thanks. Thanks, Elliot. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask Jessica if she had anything to add to that, or are we good?
No, that's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Elliot. Very, very helpful.